Welcome to another episode of Inside the Margins, where we investigate how risk management professionals across fintechs, banks, and global financial institutions understand and mitigate risk. I'm your host, Matthew Komos, founder and CEO of Ogma Risk and Analytics. Today, our guest is Vincenzo Riflesso. He's worked on the options and equities trading side, as well in portfolio management. We had a great discussion around risk management, systemic processes. I'm really looking forward to diving in deep on some of his perspectives. Vince, welcome to Inside the Margin. Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having invited me, Matthew. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, I was really excited to have this discussion. And before we get into some of the details and questions that we have, why don't you give us a little bit about your journey, kind of your background and where you're at today?
Yeah. I started more or less 25 years ago as an equity derivatives trader in three different major banks in Europe. Then after 10 years, I moved into the risk management space in Switzerland, actually, when I joined a multi-asset structured products firm in Zurich. And now, I think 3 years ago, I moved in a pretty young firm, specialized always in the structured products, but expanding as well in the portfolio, quantitative portfolio management framework.
Excellent. So it's been quite a journey. We have similar tenure in the industry. I've been around for 25 plus years, and hopefully we've both grown a little bit wise with our many years of experience. But I think often about some of my early days in risk management and analytics and how that kind of first experience shaped my perspective today, because it was much more hands-on and I was doing a lot of the analytics directly. I'd love to hear a bit about how those early days as an options trader and market maker across different areas in Europe has shaped your perspective on risk today.
It's a very good question. What I can say is that I was lucky enough to start my career as a trader in the option space. And I say lucky because when you trade options, you don't trade linear risk. You trade convexity, both on the positive and on the negative side. You understand pretty soon by experience, by mistakes, that actually what you see today in terms of risk can be completely different from what you can see tomorrow, because the strong change in the market regime can completely change the risk profile of your portfolio. So you are ready, you become pretty ready to expect the unexpected. And so you bring this lesson during your entire career, I would say. So when from trading, I joined risk, I see things somehow in advance compared to my colleagues, because I know that the importance of the stress test, I know the importance of the limited importance of the VAR for whatever use is done. And you understand immediately, but the very important thing is the concept of negative convexity in a portfolio, that actually what you generate today is a positive carry, and everything looks pretty under control. Under a stress environment can change completely, and you find yourself in a completely unexpected field.
Interesting. And I would imagine, and correct me if I'm wrong, because obviously I'm much more on the consumer credit side, where timelines can vary. You have, there's some amount of urgency in certain situations, but in others, you kind of have this repeatable framework to try to mitigate risk. But I would imagine in the trading world, which many maybe risk professionals don't understand, you have to manage uncertainty in real time, like probably pretty quickly, right? And so how does that change your perspective or your ability to move quickly?
Well, for me, it was pretty interesting, because when you are a trader, actually you are the risk manager. You manage the risk. So When you move into the risk department, you do not manage the risk. You just set, according to the board risk appetite and the executive committee that implements everything in place. You just monitor how the risk is managed by traders, and you support the trading to manage the risk through reporting, through analysis, through study, these kind of things. So you know very well the difference between who manage the risk, who control the management of the risk. But even if I were in risk control, I always was thinking, you bring your DNA with you as an active risk manager. You still think about how to manage the risk, right? In first person. So from this perspective, I always had a very good, most of the times, I would say, a very good relationship with traders, because we understand pretty well each other, And instead, I saw some colleagues in my previous experience, pure risk managers from a definition perspective. They struggle a lot to talk with traders. They didn't understand it. They completely speak a different language. So you find that a pure risk manager could easily fall in the trap of to see risk as something static, something that, you reach the limit is a problem, right? Instead, if you approach risk dynamically, as a trader should do, you understand that the controls are important, limits are very important, but limits sometimes can be breached, even for the good reasons. You know what I mean? And I just remember an example. It's a little bit maybe too much technical, but I remember an example in Leon Tech when you have to, in this big exotic portfolio under the I think it was 2020, the big crisis. I mean, at the time, you had to, according to the indication coming from the market, you had to remark the correlation. And because we run a negative correlation position, this doesn't mean just a big loss, big negative P&L impact, but from a trader perspective, it represents a change in the delta, a change in how to hedge the delta. And in that means at that time that you should, at the end, sell delta mostly at the bottom of what it was considered by trading at the bottom, right? And they were completely right. So from this perspective, you say, okay, let's bypass for a while this check on marking the correlation, because actually this has to be done for a good reason. If you don't want to sell delta, I mean, at a super discount level when the market drops 30%, Wait a little bit, you see, and then you measure the delta in a dynamic way. But this means go against the static principle of the IPV, independent price verification, that they tell you at that time that they have to remark up the correlation, the implied correlation. So this is a typical example where the flexibility and understanding, first of all, what traders mean by that, it's a.
That's so interesting. Yeah, I think it highlights the importance, I think, for any risk professional of, not getting too wrapped up in the theoreticals, right? So we can all be very theoretical about risk theory and risk framework, but in reality, there are the practicalities of what's to your point, the trader mindset brings, the dynamic environment and mindset to that risk man. And, we see it the same. There's always this balance of, on a theoretical basis, I can build a great model. I can model out what my risk tolerances are, but there's also the business decision. So I have to balance that with what's practical, what's feasible, what's cost effective, any number of things that are important to the overall decision, not just, I'm going to take this static perspective and, and run it through. Something we talked about was the fact that what helps in these scenarios is when you have a systemic process in play, like there's systemic components of what you're doing that allows for this effective risk management. Why is it important? Let's talk about it, because I know it's a fan of the systemic approach, and I think that decision making is really important.
It's fundamental for me. And it's very good the parallelism between risk management or trading in the systematic with the systematic decision process and the portfolio management that I'm experiencing right now. And the systematic approach means that if you are a risk manager, for example, you have to produce systematically reporting. So the reporting activity that can be seen as a boring task actually is not boring at all. Because first of all, you give a systematic approach to and second is the only way, I tell you, when you prepare reporting, to see things inside, much better than people that read the reporting, So when you do the reporting, you have the possibility to put the hands potentially in the problems and highlight as fast as possible. I said, who read the report sometimes doesn't have this opportunity. It doesn't have the same, it's not the same cognitive approach. And this is true as well in the portfolio management. Because I'm realizing more and more what I expected already, especially during the last year, that if you have a systematic approach, it is much, much easier to follow the process, not like normal times, but during a crisis like the March and April 2025, when the market swing in a violent way. Or even now, I tell you that I heard a lot of people, they say, oh, the market is a mess. We don't understand what's going on. I understand perfectly what's going on. Because I have a model that tell me there is today a very high level of dispersion. So even if the index doesn't move almost, right? But the sectors are moving a lot. The selection of the stocks is becoming much more important today than 1 year ago. And if you run some factors in your portfolio, is much systematically, of course, is much easier to spot that instead to go through multiple narratives like inflation is going up or is going down, the rates will go up or will go down. I don't know what's going on, right, in the future, but I know what's happening right now because my model show me systematically this.
That's really fascinating. We deal with market risk, liquidity, etc. But exact same perspective that, some people do view reporting as boring, but I couldn't agree more. I mean, that's where you really get to understand the data and how things are moving. Oftentimes we'll work with clients and just because, we're building new reports for them that they don't have. And we'll uncover something and say, hey, did you know that this is happening? And they go, we had no idea. And so, it's that opportunity to kind of reveal something new about what's happening. And to your point, you take that systemic approach, in consumer credit, we have a lot of metrics that are standard ways to measure the health of the portfolio, the health of your origination book. There's just standard metrics, right? And oftentimes I'll see, lenders or banks that aren't using some of those. It's like, guys, this, let's implement this systemic approach because we know what works and we know how to measure it, right? And so it's I think the multitude of, understanding the data, measuring it, but then also you pointed out, it's also understanding what it means, right? So there's that last component of, okay, I can read data and reporting, but I better understand what it means. And that's where, to me, the years of experience, like your years of experience, help drive strategy, help drive, what moves am I going to make because I'm seeing specific indicators, right? So something to touch on, you mentioned the fact that you have a model, right? Your models that you understand. I think when we were discussing earlier, you mentioned, treating the model as the client. So what does that mean in practice, and how does it change maybe your behavior, the way you approach things?
Well, first, I want to highlight something that you mentioned that for me is very important. And when you say how to use the data, reading the data, how to manage the data, I think there is, in my experience, there is a strong cognitive bias in. What I mean by that is the following: if you are a trader, automatically you are perceived as more important. So whatever you say, management hear you. I mean, they give you a lot of importance, but not just management, the entire industry, right? They think you are a smart person. And if you are a risk manager, generally is not the same, right? But I can tell you, in my personal experience, when I was a trader, I knew much, much less than what I know today. I was assuming that I knew things, but at the end, I didn't know. So the bank, and not just one bank, different banks gave me portfolio to manage, right? Money to manage. But I tell you, and I remember that a lot of people wanted to talk with me regarding a market view, whatever. And I was saying things without knowing what I was saying. This is the truth. And as today, I see the other way around, but I'm completely fine with that, because I can see there is a strong difference in the cognitive bias, because when I am in the room with the trading, I can see that trading is recognized, whatever they say, somehow more important,
Mm-hmm.
It is what it is, but I can tell you that in my experience was not the right thing.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, well, I think it highlights the importance of, data is often the truth where ego is not. So, and there might be many smart people involved, but the reality is like what's going to drive the right decision making, right? And it's fascinating when you start getting a lot of intelligent folks together trying to solve problems, because it can. I always find it fascinating, but I've always had the mindset of, if I can surround myself with people that are smarter than me, then I'm going to do all right. So that's kind of my mantra. Something we talked about was describing, treating the model as the client. So that, there's a lot of modeling that you obviously do. So people that might be hearing that, concept for the first time, what does that really mean in practice, and how does it potentially change behavior?
Yeah, change a lot behavior. In my experience, first of all, how the clients behave, I think is an incredible important source of information for a portfolio manager, because you see what they are thinking, and sometimes they are doing the right thing, sometimes they are doing the wrong things. Anyway, it's an information. It's important to not bypass. So you have to get it and you have to make yours, what they want to do. As a second thing, I noticed that clients and sometimes the same portfolio manager are released when you talk about models, when you talk about quantitative investing, because they know already that when everything is calm, is quiet, again, the concept of negative convexity, because you can apply multiple frameworks. When things are okay, it's easy to take a decision or to move in a way or in another. But when things becomes complicated, like just to give you an example, the tariffs war in March 2025, which you have a massive amount of narratives around. Media start to say that inflation will spike up, so you have to do this. And there are a lot of experts that they tell you what's going on in the near future, So you receive a lot of pressure. And in this situation, it's not easy to be calm and take a rational decision. So it's easy to fall in trap in these narratives and to try to do things that you didn't think about before. So you really, I don't want to talk just about emotions or these kind of things, but it's much easier to do wrong decisions in this context. And when you go to a portfolio manager, you say, look, I have the system that I tested for the last 20, 30 years, experienced different market regimes. And the system tell you you should act in the same way you did 1 month before, right? Nothing changed. And so it's much easier if you are a quantitative portfolio manager, manage this situation than a discretionary portfolio manager.
Yeah, because you stick to that quantitative strategy, right? And it's hard though as humans, right? Because often emotions can come. I agree, like emotions are one, but what I find interesting too is also trying to decipher through all the noise of the media and because I feel like there's a lot, there can be a lot of noise that influence markets and shift momentum and stuff. So I think to your point though, when you have a proven quantitative strategy, like that's the rational choice. So it's gonna work out more often than it isn't, right? So that's the key. But how do you, when you think about quantitative strategies, what makes it robust enough to trust in live markets, right? Because you're talking about real money here. As you go, how do you trust it? How do you know?
Yeah. Now, this is the beginner is probably the most difficult part, because whatever you do, and actually I had a very nice conversation yesterday with a former trader of Goldman Sachs. It's a former colleagues as well. That he tell you, and I completely agree with him. When you go around and talk with clients and talk about your strategy, whatever, if they heard the word back test, they don't believe, because of course they know that there is the possibility to completely overfit your data and show you the most wonderful equity line.
Right.
So, but I think in that situation, it's very important the credibility you have as a person first, and second, there are multiple ways, if you are a quant, to prove how robust is your backtest, even if it's just a theoretical, right? It's not real. Because there are many criteria to implement the robustness, just going from the simple in sample, out of sample, and then going into the multiple, parameterization and checking multiple equity lines, how the parameters change, impact the equity line. So there are multiple ways to do that. The industry, is not just born yesterday, right?
Right.
First time that you do a back test. But I know that whatever you do, whatever proofs you do, and it's a matter of trust. So you have to have your credibility, and the person that like you to give you money to manage, there should be I believe there should be a personal thing, right? So something that, okay, I like you as a person, first of all. Then second, I believe in what you are doing, okay? And so let's try, okay? Yeah. But I think the first thing is that it is very personal. So it's I like you for feeling perspectives or how you talk, how you move, it's because we are human beings and we have a cognitive bias everywhere. So it depends if I remember somebody that hit you when you were a child, whatever I say, it's useless. You will never do business with me because I trigger you something bad,
So true. Yeah. It's all about, and we see it a lot, on the consulting side. It's the same concept. I mean, the first thing is we build relationships with people, and then ultimately we're trying to help solve their problems. Right. And the same thing, like if oftentimes we're building credit models for clients and they're giving, that not only are they giving us money, but we're helping shape their lending decisions, right? So it's, they want to deploy X millions of dollars. And so, they're trusting, okay, if you put this new credit model in, we're going to be making better decisions. I'm increasing the likelihood I can identify the consumers that are not going to pay, but we go through the same thing, back testing and all kinds of, ways that we can show quantitatively that the model's working, but it does come down to trust, because you have to have that good relationship with your client, with the chief risk officer, whomever you're working with, because it's not enough to just say, trust me. It's, there's the component of trust me, but then let me bring the empirical evidence. And that's what I love about what we do, because we talk in data and truths and empirical evidence. And it's hard to debate that. There is some uncertainty, right? And when you have like in your case, you're dealing with evolving market dynamics a lot of time. And you have to keep like a strict model discipline, right? And stick to your rational thinking. So, I think it's interesting and your pressure on that front is a little bit different, right? Like, how do you approach that strict model discipline as things evolve? What do you think about, or when do model overrides become important? Like, what are the ways you're thinking about these things dynamically?
Hey, it's a very, very nice question because again, as a human being, you are tempted to be influenced by the recent events. And I give you an example. My model one of my factors is a momentum, pretty simple momentum factors. And during the summer, we enter with this model long with a MicroStrategy. But we enter long roughly around $400 time. Mm-hmm. And during the model stay long the entire month, and the stocks went up almost plus 10% and then dropped. And we close when we roll the position with a -8, -9%. Talking about MicroStrategy. I don't know if you follow them. Okay. Today, the value of MicroStrategy is $130, 130, okay? So I'm talking about 75% throw down compared to that price. But I don't want to talk about that. So if something like that happened, okay, so the stock went up 10%, I didn't take any profit and I closed in loss because my model told me to do that. Mm-hmm. So next time you roll the position, you close MicroStrategy, the model closed MicroStrategy, you enter in another stock. I think it was Western Digital, something like this. And the stock did something similar. Actually, the stock went up plus 20%. So I was saying, okay, now I don't want to be, I don't want to wait the rolling or whatever the model tell me. Now we'll take the profit, right? Or maybe half of the profit. But we haven't done. So because I talk with my client, we say, what do you want to do? And he said, no, we want to, at the end, we decided to be sticked on the model, not change anything. Mm-hmm. Actually, this changed completely the performance of the entire portfolio because at the end, we close at plus 50, plus 60%.
Wow.
Right? Then it happened again with other stocks, and one was the Warner Bros. Digital, the one and after actually the model entered long before the takeover was announced first by Paramount, then by Netflix or whatever they do in order. So we get again, and we are still long, by the way, on this stock, right? Until the end of the bid over, probably. And we get a huge benefits as well there. So actually, after we start to realize what does it mean, and then we enter again at the beginning of the year. We had the record month at the beginning of this year, thanks to even if the Nasdaq lost 1% in January, something like that, and the S&P was almost flat. We had the record. The portfolio did plus 6%. thanks to the momentum, because we were able to capture a couple of stocks like ScanDisk, like some other memories, semiconductors, that because they were respecting the parameters of the model, we enter long, not because we believed in the semiconductors, we believe here, we believe there. And so we experience again a fact that, 99% of the times is much better to stick on the model, and potentially in what I believe in tactical hedging strategies during a very turbulent period, where it's always convenient not change the asset allocation, not change the model, even not proceed with the risk on, risk off modality in your backtest, but it's better in general to enter with a tactical hedging strategy and short the market with futures or with options without changing the core of the portfolio, right? So I believe more in that.
Yeah, and I think that speaks to your experience, right? Because not everybody would have that necessarily that mindset. And it's I think that's part of the value of having those years of experience, and I think it then translates to an area I want to talk about next, which is if you take a step back and think about these different moving parts that are happening. There's this overall governance and operational discipline that needs to exist, and we talked about the fact that you're not just overseeing market risk. You're looking at regulatory, operational, cyber, fraud, internal controls. Like there's a much bigger picture that you're kind of looking at from your role perspective. And I oftentimes see people striving for perfect execution, which I don't believe is possible. And how we talked a bit about the fact that respecting deadlines and making sure that if you're committing to something that you're getting it done accordingly, because they're all the moving parts are connected, right? So why do you believe that those deadlines are so key versus that perfect execution?
We come back again to the concept of process and a systematic process.
Yeah.
If you are head of risk in a whatever companies, I think, or whatever industry, you are responsible for what is called internal control systems, ICS. So the ICS actually represent the main framework where all the departments of the firm, in our case, you have trading, operations, documentation, compliance, legal, risk, even the management, right? The exco members, they are involved directly in these internal control systems. So they are actually the risk owners, we say. And when you do this, the first thing you have to talk with the people is it's not for me too much important that you do this control in a perfect way or in a way that you think is acceptable. Whatever it is for me, there is a deadline, there is a monthly deadline, there is a quarterly deadline, there is a semi-annual deadline. Please try to respect this deadline and put in the control whatever it is, whatever you have, sorry.
Yeah.
Because I can assure you that if you do this, next time, the probability you will add something or you will do better increase a lot compare if you don't do anything today.
Yeah.
Second is auditable. So when the audit comes and check what you are doing, you can show actually what you did.
Yeah. And I've experienced oftentimes in different firms, the perfect is often the enemy of the good. And trying to get to that perfection, but then nothing is really getting solved.
Yes.
Yeah, and it can feel like you're not making progress, and then you owe it to the board to say, hey, we're not hitting these measures, and this is why. And to your point, it oftentimes will come back to process, systemics, making sure you have all of that in place. What, in your experience, when firms are attempting to build more structured risk governance, what are some of the mistakes you've encountered, right? So I think there's an aspect of not having a systemic approach that's obvious based on what we talked about, but what other mistakes are there? What should be people thinking about when they're trying to set up that more structured risk governance?
I think the main risk or the main trap the management can fall in is considering the function of risk as a regulatory function, something that is required, but is a cost. I have to do it, and I need to keep this function because the regulator asked me to do. And that's it. And do all the business, all the decisions are made somewhere else. Okay, This is, I think, the main risk. That's why you have an instrument that is called risk committee. And the risk committee should happen in every firm. But it's very important that the risk committee, there are people of the executive committee in this one. So people that take decision have to be part of the risk committee. But at the same time, the risk committee should not be just executive committee people. So it should be a mix of people that are outside. So you know what I mean? Because it's easy if you have a pool of people, to influence each other like a band of brothers, So at the end, one take the decision, the others, they say, yes, sir, you are the boss. So you need somebody else outside that bring some fresh lines, fresh, not just ideas, but opinions.
And willing to challenge, right?
And challenge. So the risk committee, they're not members, they're not part of the executive committee. They have to, their function is actually to challenge and to make even stupid questions because they don't have the same access to the information that the executive committee members they have. So in this, mismatch of information, there is a lot of value, And then you create dynamic, you create dialectics in order to not just stay in the context of the boss always decide, So you have to always challenge the boss in different contexts to take the right decision considering all the inputs they are in the RISCO and the executive committee.
Exactly. And that's, I think one of the things I love to say is it's part of risk management is getting people comfortable with being uncomfortable. And sometimes that uncomfortability is the boss, has to make some challenging decisions. But if you provide the most, the best information you can and present all of the potential outcomes, and with some probabilities. Well, Vince, I got to say, this has been a great conversation. When we first connected, I wasn't sure. It's so fascinating every time I talk with folks from different areas of financial services and just to understand how much we approach problems very similarly, even though they're different problems. But the way that we, from the analytics to the process to the, repeatability and execution, right? Like that's part of being a risk manager, and beyond theory, it's, how does it work in practice? How do we go about these things in many different ways, right? Systemic risk management, quantitative discipline, operational governance, all these things. Before we close, I just want to ask you one final thing. If you had to leave senior risk leaders with one piece of advice about building that disciplined risk framework in volatile markets, what would it be?
Well, again, sorry if I'm repetitive, is the consistency of the process, whatever it is. And consistency can be reached through a systematic approach. So again, if you are a risk manager, do regular reporting every single day, and not consider reporting as a boring thing. If you start to do something, do systematically. If you decide to provide management with a specific reports every week, keep on doing until they tell you to stop. You know what I mean? So always systematic, always. And when you approach the market, is incredibly fundamental. I mean, is incredibly important to have a systematic approach in your investing, in your trading, in your in whatever you do. I suspect as well you have benefits as well in let's say in the real life. If you have a systematic approach, like going to sleep at the same hour, wake up at the same hour, If you have a dog, it's extremely easy because when you have a dog, you take the dog outside every single morning. Keep on doing it. No way. No, it's raining. Okay, you have to do it. It's snowing. You have to do it. It's sunny. You have to do it. So if you have a dog, I think it's an incredible good exercise. So just to be a little bit fun, take a dog because it's an incredible nice experience, I tell you. And it teaches you to be systematic.
Systematic and disciplined, right?
Yes, correct.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, really appreciate you joining us. And this has been another episode of Inside the Margins. Hope you all enjoyed.
Thank you, Matthew.